welcome everyone to today's webinar. For those of you I don't know, I'm Ruth McCausland and I am the Director of the Yuwaya Ngarra-li Partnership here at UNSW, a long-term partnership with the Dharriwaa Elders Group in Walgett. I acknowledge and pay my deep respects to elders past and present here on Bidjigal country at UNSW, and in particular also to elders and custodians on Gamilaroi country in Walgett, and send greetings to those from the Elders Group joining us here remotely today. Also pay my respects to the elders and custodians of the unceded country that you're all joining from today. So the policy paper that we are discussing in today's webinar is grounded in the vision of the Dharriwaa Elders Group, as is all of the work that we collaborate on together. And we started this webinar series a few years ago now as a way of sharing aspects of our work across different areas, including topics. Some of you might have joined us in the past for webinars on food and water security, on topics such as Indigenous data governance, our approach to research and evaluation, work on housing, and of course, work that you'll also hear more about today focused on children and young people. All our past webinars are available on our website if you're interested in watching them back, and this one will also be recorded and shareable. Now, the work that we're discussing today grew from collaboration with May Miller-Dawkins, who's a long-term advisor to Yuwaya Ngarra-li. Those of you who joined our webinar on our evaluation and learning report last year will remember hearing from her there. And for some reasons that colleagues will outline today, she connected us with Mel Flanagan of Nook Studios, who she'd worked with on a number of projects, and who'll be kind of talking about the research today that we're reporting on, along with some earlier work done, published in 2022 around government procurement and grants contracts. So before we get cracking on the panel, just a few things to note. So we would love those of you joining us today to introduce yourselves in the chat. Love to hear the country that you're joining from. And we're really interested, for those of you who've had a chance to have a look at the policy paper, anything that you're particularly interested in or that struck you or that you've been thinking about since engaging with it. And I guess as well, any comments along the way or questions that you might have. So we've got a bit of a tight agenda. We've got a lot of people to hear from. I'm sure you'll be wanting to hear what they've got to say. We'll try and get to any questions that you do have as part of the conversation we're having. But if we don't manage to in the hour that we have together, we always welcome follow-up discussions, and we can be contacted by email at UNSW, which is walgettpartnership@unsw.edu. Or other means, including how you registered for the webinar. So I guess before I introduce you to the panel, just for some context, so we have been philanthropically funded, Yuwaya Ngarra-li, the partnership, since 2018. And that work has been resourced by the Paul Ramsay Foundation, and that flexible long-term philanthropic funding has been really critical in enabling us to pursue this research and other topics as they've emerged, of being really important to furthering the elders' vision for change in their community. So this work, as with all of our work, is pursued in the hope that it can make a meaningful contribution in Walgett and elsewhere. This in particular focused on improving participatory and community-controlled budgeting approaches, as well as to improving lives. So to introduce you to our awesome panel, first in the webinar we will hear from wonderful Yuwaya Ngarra-li colleagues, Vanessa Hickey, who is the Community Response Lead at the Dharriwaa Elders Group, who's actually here with us at UNSW today, which is a real treat. Loretta Wetherill, the Wellbeing Lead from the Dharriwaa Elders Group in Walgett. Peter McGillivray, who is Senior Research Fellow here with the partnership at UNSW. And they'll be spending the first part of the webinar talking about the work of the Elders Group on improving wellbeing for Aboriginal children and young people in Walgett, and really providing the need and the context for this research. And then we'll hear from Mel Flanagan from Nook Studios, who'll talk more about the methodology and the findings of the research that led to this policy paper. And at the end, there'll be some time for joint discussion reflections. So at this point, I will hand you over to Loretta, Vanessa, and Peter.
Thank you, Ruth, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Peter McGillivray, And as Ruth said, I'm a member of the Yuwaya Ngarra-li Partnership team, but here on the UNSW side. And I'm so excited to be joined this afternoon by my Dharriwaa Elders Group colleagues, both online, Loretta, and here in the room with me, Yes, which is an absolute treat. We've been working together now for many years as part of the partnership on the DEG's vision, as Ruth mentioned, which is that Aboriginal children and young people in Walgett can learn, work, be safe, supported, and thrive within a robust sense of belonging to their families, culture, and country. And we've been doing this work together since 2018. And Ness and I were at the launch of the Dharriwaa Elders Group Action Plan for Children and Young People, which was 7 years ago this time in June 2018. So we've come a long way in that time. There's a photo of us there at the launch. We've come a long way in that time, but from the very beginnings of the partnership, we've had the long-term aim of redirecting government funding towards strengths-based, holistic, community-led, and sustainable initiatives. And what we've frequently discovered is that there's no baseline information about what funding is currently going to Walgett and for what purpose. But that hasn't stopped us from getting in and getting lots of work done, including the developing and the refining of the Two River Pathway to Change model and the role of Aboriginal community-controlled organisations in the diversion of children and young people from the criminal justice system and the prevention of future generations of children being criminalised in Walgett. So we're documenting this through our partnerships work and backing this up with evidence of the outcomes and impact from our work with Aboriginal community-controlled organisations, such as the DEG. In the years of working in partnership, there's been several important lessons that have made this inquiry into government finances and government budgets and how they work in communities a massive priority. It's huge. The policy paper presents these lessons very clearly with examples from the implementation of the Two River Pathway to Change model and our many attempts to access timely and accurate data to hold government and non-government agencies and organisations that get funding with responsibilities for getting outcomes for children and young people, holding them accountable. So now is a good time to bring in my Dharriwaa Elders Group colleagues to talk more about the community experience of this, of what this looks like. So hi Ness here in the room with me and Loretta online. Just to get us started, I want to help our audience this afternoon get to know you a little bit. So just to share a little bit first about your roles at the DEG and also what makes you passionate about working in an Aboriginal community organisation in Walgett. So maybe I might chuck to Loretta online first and then Ness.
Yeah, I'm Loretta Weatherall. I'm the Wellbeing Lead. And my passion about helping Aboriginal people, especially in my community, is to empowering our next generation and strengthening the community outcomes.
Thanks, Loretta. And Ness, the same question for you. A little bit about your role as Community Response Lead and what makes you passionate about working in an Aboriginal community-controlled organisation.
Hello everyone, my name's Vanessa Hickey. I'm a proud Gamilaroi woman from Walgett. My role at Dharriwaa Elders, I'm the Community Response Lead. Help community with every issue they've got. I love working in my community. The respect, I look at it as our people respect us because of just the connections we got in Walgett. Like, if they know you, they'll come along and find out what you're doing. So I really love my role at Dharriwaa Elders and working for my community.
Thanks, Ness. So I've got a few questions for both of you this afternoon that will help everybody really understand why this government financing and budget work is so important. So as I've said, we've repeatedly learned how difficult it is to access timely and accurate information about what government resources are being allocated and that resources are needed for better outcomes for children and young people. So in the experience that I've had working with you both and Dharriwaa Elders Group, it seems to me that particularly in remote and rural areas, it's a common experience for government agencies like police and police adjacent organizations and non-government organizations like PCYC and some of the other big NGOs that have contracts. They're often the primary providers of responses in community in the absence of other organizations that have resources to respond. Our experience has taught us it's incredibly difficult to get any transparency of the government detail on what the resources are, who's getting them, but also no clarity on the outcomes from it, from the resources that are actually flowing. So Ness, if I can start with you, can I get your views on something which we hear a lot of, and given your really important role as community response lead, there's a perception that communities are well funded by government and that there are enough resources for Aboriginal communities to meet the needs. Do you see that or in any outcomes at a community level?
No, I don't. Yeah, living in Walgett and like being out and about with community and getting their input. I'm just giving an example here. A few years ago, the community was crying out for help with our youth centre. Yeah, we thought we lobbied the right way, but all of a sudden funding came into Walgett. It wasn't to do up our youth centre, what community wanted. It was to build a new PCYC, which community did not even want PCYC. What we wanted was a renovated youth centre for all of our children to be there together.
And what was so important about the youth centre? Why did community really value that building and its history?
Well, we go back to the Freedom Riders when they came into Walgett. That was one of the places where they stayed. But also with myself, Loretta, a lot of community members, that was our youth centre back in the days.
When you were younger, when you were growing up.
Everyone was together. And I think that place was great for our community.
And people have that association with it.
Yeah, and it's so close to like town and the homes.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's community wanted our youth centre rebuilt or refurbished. But yeah, we ended up with
something completely that you didn't ask for.
A PCYC building that we didn't ask for.
Just as a follow-up question, one of the lessons, including that experience that we've learnt in our work together and which led to this research about government finances and budgeting, is that there doesn't appear to be any recourse for community members when government spending doesn't service community needs. This is a really clear example, but there's lots of others. But what I want to ask you, Ness, is in your role day to day, what are the contributing social needs to the experience of social disadvantage in Walgett? What are the things that community are facing every day that's hard to see the outcomes from government resources?
Lack of housing, the overcrowding, homeless, not enough employment, the impact of low job seeker payments.
So that's the are there a lot of people on job seeker in Walgett?
Yes, in Walgett we've got a few people on, lots of people on Centrelink, and like it's very hard for them. You know, once they pay their bills, they've hardly got anything left for food, and the housing, like our housing is poor. You know, no one's been out to Walgett to build housing or even fix our houses up properly. They do send workers into Walgett, but just do a band-aid job.
Yeah. And I can't imagine that there's anybody that are giving those opportunities for employment in Walgett.
No, it's all people coming in town to do it. Yeah.
Thanks, Ness. Loretta, I've got a couple of questions for you now. In your role as wellbeing lead, you're setting up the Walgett Youth Wellbeing Service. Why is it so important that Aboriginal community-controlled organisations like the Dharriwaa Elders Group that's employing local Aboriginal people, why is it so important that ACCOs are being supported to deliver directly or be closely involved in delivering services to children and young people?
I think it's important because we are here to stay. We know our community. Also, the community and young people, they trust us. We know what the community wants. Yeah, and it's culturally safe for our communities to come to our ACCOs, and yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about the Youth Wellbeing Service and the way that it's working in Gallimully, which is the new space that you and Ness are working out of? And after you talk a little bit about the Youth Wellbeing Service, I might get Ness to talk a little bit about the Dealing with Fines team, because it really tells the story of how important the holistic work of the Dharriwaa Elders Group is.
Yeah, so Gallimully, it means care for in Gamilaroi language. And ours is community-led programs, one being the Youth and Wellbeing Service and Dealing with Fines, Food and Water, and Community Troubleshooter.
Yeah.
And at the moment, we are delivering programs for the community with the youth wellbeing and the women's programs.
And some of the photos here on the screen are from the activities that you're running with young people in Walgett, aren't they? We've just got some
Yeah.
photos of on the slideshow here.
So some of the activities we've done so far, we've worked with rangers building frog habitats. We did Christmas activities, craft activities, native cooking with Alicia, who's an Aboriginal dietitian. And we've also worked, we had the WAMs come and talk about snake awareness before the Christmas break. And the women comes once a week on a Monday, and they do programs as well, activities.
Wonderful. I'm just going to ask Ness now. Can you tell us a little bit about the women's program? Because this is a really important example of the multi-generational way that you're working with community at Gallimully. You're working with the nanas, you're working with the aunties, you're working with the children and young people who come in at different times, and the space is really becoming that so important to be able to do that work.
It is, yes. With my role, I'm also the dealing with fines lead. We get people coming into our office once a week or whenever they can to cut out their fines, whether they're doing paintings or just sitting down having a yarn. We were speaking about, because we've got our women's group and our youth program, we're in the talks now of setting up a men's group also at the back of our building. So yeah, just so we can get our men involved as well, like not just leaving it with the kids and the mothers, grandmothers. We want our men to be involved too. With our first women's group, like, I just have to have a little giggle. We had two men sitting in our office. Like, they were so excited for us, and I said to them, the only way you can join is need to go and chuck a wig on. And like, they laugh, well, we will. But it's just seeing community members coming in and wanting to be involved. And also we ask our community what would they like to see come out of our building. So it's not just, certain people, like it's open for all community kind of thing. Yeah.
Like so that accessibility and welcomeness for everybody.
For everybody, yeah.
Thank you so much. I think that's a really important kind of setting the scene for another really important question and lesson out of the research on government financing and budgets. One of the key lessons that from this policy paper, a lesson from our work that made this policy paper so urgent, is that there is a mismatch between fragmented government funding for specific programs through separate departments and the reality, which is that we need funding for holistic and responsive approaches to wellbeing for children and young people and their families. And so the work of Gullamulli, which it means to care for
Careful,
in
yeah.
Gamilaroi, is that holistic model and has been achieved through flexible funding with a philanthropic partner. So given that there is this fundamental mismatch between how government funds and what's needed, it's a real problem. Loretta, Walgett now has a place-based ACCO-led model in its youth wellbeing service and in Gullamulli, which is what is being called for around the country from Aboriginal communities all around the country. It's a holistic model of support for children and young people. But many people on the call today, given all of that, might be surprised the DEG has had difficulty in securing government funding, hasn't it? And we've struggled to get that funding up. So my question is for Loretta, and Ness, you can have a go at having a response to this as well. What's the impact of that for children and young people and families you work with, given what you've heard, the feedback from the work that you've been doing so far? Loretta?
Yeah, it's a big impact because we can't deliver the programs that that supports our young people and our families. And also at the moment, I'm using staff from other programs, which takes them away from their program so that they can't deliver their programs. And also it's we don't have enough staff to deliver the youth program because we have lots of support, lots of programs that we are working towards to support our young people, like daily group-based activities, educational and support focus sessions for families, on-country day trips, school term family dinner nights, on-country day trips for the kids with the rangers, and also at the moment, I'm the only one that works. So I cover two programs, the food and water as well. And that's just, it burns us out. And I think people know that too, because we're so passionate about our community, we will do jobs for three people. Like that's just who we are because we care about our people. Like we don't work 9 to 5, we work a 24-hour day, because if someone come to our house, we're still working, or we'll check on them, or if we go home, oh, I forgot to check on that person, and we do that. So yeah, and at the moment, the kids are they only come Tuesdays. They want to stay longer and they want to come every day, but we don't have the staff to attend to that. So that's why our funding, it's a big impact for Gullamulli.
Yeah, so having those government resources to actually fund the work that you have planned. So all of that work that you just listed off is what you want to do if you could get the youth wellbeing service
Yeah,
funded.
and not just me wanting to do it, it's our kids, our young
Yes.
people. They've had of input in how they design our Gullamulli, what they want here, so they can be safe and come and do things every day.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Loretta. That's really important to hear. Ness, before we pass back on to Ruth and Mel, what do you see as the impact on children and young people and the families you work with if we can't get government to fund the real solutions?
I could see in our community there's going to be more problems in our community. And like me and Loretta, we're very upset because we worked hard on 3 funding opportunities for Gullamulli, and like being knocked back, like it's heartbreaking. Because I see it, if you're well known in a community, you're going to be respected by the kids. And like what me and Loretta do at Gullamulli, just for them little 2 hours, we wish we could, make that longer. But it's just seeing the kids' faces, the excitement, and not just us, letting them know we sit down and we want to hear from the kids. You know, what would you like to see to come? And all their great ideas, like it's beautiful to see, but being knocked back, you know, by the government to fund what we want to do, what we know, what community, it's just very heartbreaking, you know, and I'm thankful for the philanthropical funding that we have gotten over the years to, well, so we can do our work.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've always got to come. We're not leaving Walgett. You know, we're going to be based in Walgett probably all our lives. And what really upsets me is people coming into our community trying to do what we're already got set up.
Yeah.
Like it's very upsetting, and coming from an Aboriginal community controlled organisation.
Yeah.
Like our Dharriwaa Elders Group, it's been running for over 20 years, and recently we've grown. You know, we've got about 15 Aboriginal local people working now at DEG, which I'm very, very proud of. And yeah, I wish the government would take that lead the way philanthropical have.
Yeah.
Because, like, yeah, we could see wonders coming out of our community.
I think that's an excellent point to finish up on, to pass now to our colleagues, Ruth and Mel, to hear more about the detail of the research. Thank you, Loretta and Ness.
Thanks so much, Loretta and Ness and Pete. It's always such a privilege to hear you talk about your work so powerfully and to see all that you've built come to fruition. And Gullamulli is the most special place. It's extraordinary. And the potential there to grow is incredible. So I think you've set the scene so beautifully for the purpose of this research. So the kind of passion and commitment long term that the Dharriwaa Elders Group's always brought to this work and to its community, and vision for change. And what we've learned over the years, I suppose, in working with the Elders Group is identifying an issue that's of concern and thinking about, okay, how do we work together to address this? And then just really seeing so many systemic issues. And I remember this access to data and information about government funding and what's actually going into Walgett, like what's currently on paper being spent and who's it going to. And I remember with some colleagues from the Elders Group having a meeting with a former Minister for Aboriginal Affairs and explaining, you know, we're trying to find out, obviously we're not looking in the right places, we're trying to get data and information about funding that's currently being allocated to Walgett at a Commonwealth and state level. And the minister said, yeah, I would like that too. Like this is not something that's easily accessible, which just seems, like a massive systemic issue. And so I guess our work has often been about identifying issues in Walgett, discovering that there is a much more systemic issue at play, and then thinking about how you might respond to that in a place-based, community-led way, but also in a way that other communities and governments, if they're listening, could learn from. And so on that note, would like to hand over to Mel Flanagan, who's going to talk through the research methodology and the findings of this and earlier work that I mentioned. Thanks.
Great. Thanks so much, Ruth. So I'll just give you a bit of background. May and I met at an open contracting event back in 2017. And since then, we've worked together on several research projects, including with the Data Analytics Centre, the New South Wales Chief Data Scientist at New South Wales Treasury, on research and a paper called The Pathway to Trust and Participation in Data Sharing. And as open government advocates and designers, we've worked together and we've worked independently, sort of on high level and broad reforms locally in Australia, but also we work internationally as well. And we're part of a really huge community of reformers and advocates internationally. Many projects have focused on the more technical aspects to improve systems, culture, and processes, and finding ways to provide simple explanations and practical ways for governments to introduce broad reforms across financial systems and other kind of systems. Our focus at Nook has been on environment, natural resource governance, infrastructure, and now energy transition and energy justice, as well as the kind of broader service design and delivery. So it was a really exciting opportunity and a real privilege for us to be invited to collaborate with the Dharriwaa Elders Group and Yuwaya Ngarra-li and spend time in Walgett to understand what happens at a local level and frame this work with community experiences and impact and develop this evidence base for change. So I'm just going to share my screen and share some of the infographics that are in the report, and hopefully this will work and can take you through some of this. So as Ruth mentioned, our first paper was called Creating Better Futures with Contracts. And we started with contracts because that's really kind of the end of the, where the funding commitments go. So that paper's available, and what we started with was looking at trying to identify, through using the search term Walgett, the procurement systems for the federal government, AusTender, and then the New South Wales procurement platform as well. So as you can see, there was sort of like, it's really hard to find the information. And what we did find was that generally those kind of contracts go to large service providers, some of whom are actually expect locals to work for free and to volunteer. So they often kind of go to kind of regional area rather than sort of local, and because they don't have the local staff, again, they become the kind of primary contractor. When it came to looking for grants, we found, a lot of that spending actually happens with grants rather than sort of procurement processes. But even so, there's a lot you can see. There's quite a lot of grants, but a big chunk of that was actually going to the Aboriginal Medical Centre. But one of the really massive challenges with New South Wales, so federal grants are accessible and we can see where the spending, or we can see the spending, whereas in New South Wales, it's really problematic because there isn't a single platform for where, grants that have been awarded. And so people have to go and manually search for the different departments, ministers and agency websites. And so that was sort of provided the background for us looking at sort of the spending aspect. And then we then switched our focus to budget. So taking that kind of more holistic approach of going, okay, what are the commitments? Where are the budgets, and how is it making its way through to a procurement and granting process? So the background to this work was really kind of to try and understand, access to budget information, but also the context for Indigenous spending across the federal government and New South Wales as well. Is a huge volume of information that you need to sort of ingest and understand. So there's all the closing gap agreements, there's Indigenous expenditure reporting New South Wales has started to do, which is really helpful, and they're on that journey of improving that, which is really great, but that only started a few years ago. So that's, some real progress that's been made there. And then the local governments, really hard to find information. A lot of local governments don't necessarily have the websites that they need to be able to be open and transparent about a lot of this information. And so that could be really challenging too. But when it comes to actually finding the numbers and interrogating budget papers, it's extraordinarily difficult. And there's a mystique around budgets, which we all, find at budget times. And so it makes it really very, very hard for local communities to go, I just want to find out what the budget is for my place or for my region, and actually link that through to what's happened and what outcomes. One of the other massive challenges is really understanding the programs that are Indigenous programs. And so when we first started this project, we were looking at sort of New South Wales government structure at the time was 10 policy clusters, 96 agencies. There were 129 Aboriginal programs and services in 2021. And then in 2022, there were an additional 28 that were added. So there's 157 total programs and services. However, the list of those programs and services aren't on the website, and there's a spreadsheet that exists that we had asked for a number of times, and it's not publicly available. So again, this information is really invaluable for local communities, and having just a simple hack of making that information accessible for everyone would make a really big difference, particularly when it comes to looking at where the budgets are for different programs, and then understanding where people can, where to go to ask for funding as well. So I'll just kind of focus on the current state, and because the current state is there's a lot of information and it's not publicly available. If it is, it's disconnected and in inaccessible formats. The public and communities currently have limited access to information and little to no participation in budgets, policy delivery, plans, approaches to market, and contracts awarded. There is no way that communities can access information to track revenues, budgets to spending, procurement grants and contracting processes, or understand how this connects to places, closing the gap and wellbeing targets or outcomes for any level of government. So information about revenues is really scarce. I mean, there's one aspect, which is the fines, and Revenue New South Wales have got a really fantastic platform, which has helped the team deal with the fines issue, particularly through COVID and other various aspects. I mean, that's a really great example of innovation in government. But, revenues from any natural resources or kind of like, any other kind of local, revenues coming in, it's really hard to find. The program information, as we mentioned, is really inaccessible. And the policies are all out there, but not necessarily linked to programs and projects. The budget details are, very hard to interrogate. There's no way for them to be compared over and the changes over time, or see them in context with each other. And the actual spending is really unable to be tracked publicly. From the plans, sometimes plans actually have the budget allocations for some of those projects and programs, but they're not easily found and they're not connected to the tender information either. So once you get into this sort of like the tender phase, where information starts to get more kind of open and a bit more accessible, it's still disconnected. So when it comes to sourcing suppliers and understanding who the suppliers are who are potentially going to be delivering work or goods or services in a location, to get on those panels is really hard. And a lot of those panels are closed. It's, they're time consuming, particularly for community organisations, social enterprises and small businesses. So it means those processes usually favour very large suppliers, and they're not really designed for collaboration or kind of local communities. It's really that kind of like the primary contractor, or as they say in procurement, the one throat to choke, where it's like a primary contractor that is responsible for delivering those services, whether or not they've got people on the ground or not, but they're very, very large contracts. That approach to market, which is otherwise people refer to as a tender. So those tenders are published on the government platforms. There's one for the federal government, the New South Wales has their own platform, and local governments have their platforms too. But as I mentioned, sometimes, the tenders for local are not always available. And sometimes the federal and the state governments, there's a real lag in terms of when that information is made accessible. The current state is not very usable, those platforms. The information is made as open data, so it can be reused. So there is some innovation happening around Australia in regards to that. So there's, different organisations that kind of scrape the information or use systems to extract it and then republish it in better format. So Tender Trace is an example of local innovation that we've been using quite a lot for the research, because it brings together federal government, state government across Australia, so you can see all of the contracts and grants in one place, except for New South Wales grants. When it comes to selecting suppliers, that selection is a closed and opaque process and with no involvement for local communities. So they don't really know who's, they have an opportunity to go, oh, okay, we can't deliver that service. Then, who can we work with? Who would we best want to work with? And who's going to provide the best outcomes and a working relationship with us? So that kind of selection doesn't really happen. And those award notices, whoever gets the contract, which is what's called an award, that information is out there as what's called open data. It's on the platforms. The federal government publishes everything over $10,000, which is really great. New South Wales only publishes contracts over 150,000. So we're not really getting a snapshot or a sense of the funding that's really happening in New South Wales, because that threshold is so high. And a lot of local communities, those contracts are, they're $10,000, they're $50,000. It's, that under $150,000 really is that granularity that's really needed for people in New South Wales and the government to really understand where the money's going. And when it comes to the actual contract, once it's been awarded, often contract negotiations shift. There's discussions have happened and things change. And so those terms and conditions aren't really available. So therefore, local communities aren't really able to monitor whether what was promised is actually being delivered. And there's no way to provide feedback really about how and where the services are being delivered or not. So all of that kind of feedback mechanism really is relied on whoever the successful contractor is. So you're not necessarily getting the voices of local communities in there to really kind of provide that feedback and go, is that supplier really providing value or not? And when it comes to the actual delivery, there's a lack of information about the place-based outcomes, like where is it actually being delivered? What's the final cost? What was the value and what impact, did it have? And the Department of Social Services are very aware of this issue, and they call it the head office problem, which is the data systems don't allow for, there's a number of different sort of address fields. One of them is for where's the head office of the organisation. More broadly, where is something being, where is it meant to be delivered? But the actual how, like a regional contract is being divvied up into different towns or different places, people can't find that information yet. So that's one of the very kind of, it's like the devil is in the detail, is really making sure that there is a record of where people are and where that, the service is being delivered. And quite critically, one of the problems that, let's just see, I think there we go, is evaluations. So one of the massive issues is that evaluations have started happening, which is great, particularly in New South Wales. That when it does happen, the details aren't widely made available. It happens like too late. It's too little, too late. And critically, what's happening is at the end of a contract, whatever that the final amount was or what was learnt isn't being applied to the next budget cycle. And so, as we say in the paper, it doesn't have to be this way. There are other ways to do things. And that is really kind of connecting these systems and providing clarity and clear communications for communities and the government and all the decision makers on where the funding is going, and then having that participation for local communities and decisions that impact them. So that future state is really around, making sure that information is designed in formats that make sense for communities with communities, so a community-first design approach, that participation in budget and contracting processes and community-led development will lead to better results, and that processes are designed for collaboration and flexibility and to be adapted and transitioned based on changing needs and capacity, particularly in emergency times. And then information about data and revenues and budgets and projects are open and accessible in human and machine readable formats and available for reuse, which will lead to innovation, better quality data, and a delivery of more social value. And place is a core design feature, so that approaches, decisions, and impacts are able to be tracked effectively, and data is used to learn and show what is working, where, how, and why. So I'll just stop sharing for a moment, and I can go. So, the purpose of our paper is to show that there are better ways of doing things and to encourage investment in innovations, collaborations, and meaningful partnerships. The work has many threads, and we feature positive local and international examples of participation or participatory decision-making, Indigenous-led commissioning, as well as other initiatives that improve access to information, transparency, accountability, and improve the social economic outcomes for local communities. And there's examples of this all over the world. And our hope is that the paper raises awareness of the issues and provides the momentum to move forward to make those positive changes. And also inspire new ways of working and learning and taking a systems thinking approach and introducing participatory budgeting and procurement and commissioning, such as the pilot proposed by Yuwaya Ngarra-li with Walgett in New South Wales. So making government finances and making sense for communities is an ongoing piece of work for us at Nook. And we have recommendations for governments to address the systemic issues. And it's not just governments who need to consider this approach. It's also service providers and companies who are providing the accounting and resourcing and management platforms and engagement services that underpin government processes too. So we're developing an innovation program, but we're also still collecting inspiring examples from all over the world. So if you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out to me. You've also got the Yuwaya Ngarra-li contacts as well, but we really hope that this is the beginning of a conversation that really kind of shifts the dial on how we can improve these systems together. Thanks, Ruth.
Thanks so much, Mel. That was a whistle-stop tour of a lot of information, but I love how accessible you also make it. We've all learned a huge amount too about how government contracts and budgeting works that we thought we understood before this project, and then once we got into the detail of it, have learned an enormous amount. And it is, as ever, inspiring to see examples of actually how this can and does work in practice. Now, I think one of the kind of points you raised is that idea of a kind of commissioning pilot, of being able to do that. And there's obviously all sorts of very good reasons to put that in place and to trial that in a context like New South Wales and around Walgett. But there's also the dimension of, closing the gap commitments. This ticks 1,000 boxes in regards to that. And Pete and Ness, perhaps just can we go to you for a bit to think about this in terms of government accountability around closing the gap and what communities have been calling for, including organisations like the Dharriwaa Elders Group for a long time in terms of improved accountability. But actually this is squarely within the domain of those closing the gap targets and what this could contribute in that area.
Yeah, thank you, Ruth. I mean, this policy paper is being made available now at this really critical time in Indigenous affairs, both at the federal level and the state level. We've got state government budget announcements imminent, and we've got lots of debates happening right now around closing the gap as it remains the federal government's main policy commitment when it comes to Indigenous affairs, with a real focus on economic empowerment, both in the federal policy debates and at a state level. So it is critically important for this work to be made as widely available to Aboriginal community controlled organisations and Indigenous leaders all across the country who are doing this work really close to the ground, because closing the gap is an important lever that communities have to hold government accountable for the targets, but most importantly, the priority reforms, because they are the mechanisms that really give power to communities to demand different ways of working from government, and which government have signed up. State governments, territory governments, federal governments have signed up to actually transform the way that they work. And the community-led commissioning model is a really tangibly good way that outcomes could be improved by engaging in this budgeting work. So at its heart, a community-led commissioning pilot could involve community organisations working collaboratively to share decision-making power. That's another key mechanism within the Closing the Gap framework, is actually setting up genuine shared decision-making around priorities and resources to support children and young people's wellbeing with local ACCOs and any other relevant community leaders and collaborators. So this could enable the local groups to determine the priorities, allocate budget resources, including overseeing relevant commissioning, ongoing engagement with local community, and an ability to adapt to changing circumstances, as Mel said. So really bringing that flexibility that reflects the reality in communities. And we've learned an enormous amount of what that reality is, which we've tried to document in all of our Yuwaya Ngarra-li work, and which is really at the heart of a lot of the initiatives and programs and services that have been set up by the DEG is in response to crisis. So that's really critical. So working in this way would require commitment, real commitment at a ministerial and senior leadership level within government, but that would be a constructive and solution-driven way for political will to be used for tangible good. So if ministers were prepared to actually do something that was genuinely what community was calling for, this we say would be the way to do it.
Yeah.
So I might just quickly with that get some final thoughts from Ness and Loretta, if you have any, and also Ruth and Mel, and also final thoughts from our audience today that have joined us to also put your thoughts into the chat. And just to say thank you for some of the questions that have come through from the chat, including a really great question about the coordinating between state and federal government agencies around the management of contracts. That's a really good question. But maybe I'll pass to you, Ness, first. Do you have any final thoughts or words?
Yeah, I do. I would like to say the government needs to work differently. Their way is not working for Aboriginal people. And working with us to better communities like Walgett would be a good start. And like it's coming from community, not people coming into our community telling us like, you know, we're going to do this, this and this, because that way is not working. It's got to be community-led, community-driven, and I see if it's coming that way, there's going to be big changes for a lot of communities around Australia.
Thank you, Ness. Loretta? You're okay? You're on mute.
No, I said I agree with Nessa. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, with that, I might pass back to Ruth and Mel.
Thanks, Pete. Mel, there's a great question in the chat that perhaps we'll ask you to respond to if you can, as well as some concluding comments.
Yeah, sure. I saw Debbie's question about the pathway to trust and participation. We developed a set of principles that we hadn't published, actually. The paper itself was unable to be published, but we can publish the principles. So we're working on that. So slingly a detail. But also Indra asked if there were some good examples of co-design and commissioning that you can point to. In the paper, there's an example from colleagues in Canada who had a really inspiring approach to participatory procurement, which was bringing all of the traditional or First Nations groups together to design a system which was to help with the monitoring of the oceans and also a safety mechanism. So that's a really good case study. There are, in terms of participatory budgeting, there's like hundreds, literally hundreds of examples all over the world. But there are also some really great examples of that sort of ongoing monitoring of procurement, design and delivery. So yeah, but definitely have a look at the paper, and there's other examples that we'll be leading to in the future as well. And I guess I just want to follow up with that. I know from the community perspective, and it's really frustrating, and from just being, a business having to, engaging with government, it's really tricky using those systems. These systems are also used internally as well. And so this is a really good opportunity for the Australian government, the New South Wales government, to invest in better systems to help internal productivity and develop, build better trust with local communities as well. So it's not just the external audience that is really the kind of users and for these systems, it's also internally. And as you mentioned, Ruth, it's the ministers, it's the decision makers internally who really need these systems to be transformed. And again, there are really good examples all over the world of how countries are connecting revenues that are coming in from, for example, mining, oil and gas projects or energy projects, linking it all the way to a local town. These systems exist everywhere else in, a lot of places in the world. And we could be, you know, leading this sort of like digital transformation, but also this community partnership transformation in Australia. And I really hope that our governments will invest in this moving forward.
And with that, Mel, I might just quickly tag on to the end of that in the policy paper, there is an invitation from the Dharriwaa Elders Group and Yuwaya Ngarra-li to government to engage in the potential of a community-controlled budgeting and commissioning pilot as an initiative to address concerns we've talked about today and get better wellbeing outcomes for children and young people. So that invitation is there for that engagement to do exactly what you've described and what we've put in detail in the policy paper.
And I'll just add to that as well. Thanks, Peter, because I think these are big the data issues and the data systems and what needs to change. These are big issues. Like they're not that easy. Otherwise they'd be, you know, they'd be done right now. But I think looking again, taking that place-based approach and going, Walgett, you know, we're aware, we've got all these things happening, we've done the research, you know, we've got skills, you've got skills, we've all got skills. Work with us, you know, like bring in that kind of those, you know, that partnership and be able to kind of do that local innovation, I think is really critical. It's not just take the paper away and, you know, do something. It's actually just work with communities. And those of us, you know, who have that kind of open government approach, I think would be really valuable and is really desperate.
Thanks, Mel. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Vanessa. And thanks, Loretta. I think you'll all agree that's been a really fantastic exploration and hopefully brought to life the story behind this policy paper. Definitely encourage you to dive into the detail of it. We've just skimmed the surface. Always up for hearing for people interested in engage from government or from other organisations or other communities who are interested in learning from our collaborative work. Would encourage you all to go to the Dharriwaa Elders Group website and Facebook pages to keep updated, including on the amazing work happening at Gullamulli with children and young people. Also up for hearing from anyone who's got ideas around resourcing the incredible youth wellbeing service and growing that over time. It's such a privilege for those of us at the UNSW end to support this work in the way that we can. Contact details there in the chat. Always love to hear from you all, and thank you for joining us. And massive thanks to Izzy Burton-Clark, just as a PS, for as ever wrangling the tech in the most incredible ways. We love you, Izzy.
Thanks, Izzy.
And hello to everyone there at the Dharriwaa Elders Group. We can see you on the Zoom. It's lovely to be live and direct into the Elder Centre.